Today, we're going to be talking about, now that we've adopted this new ministry model, what that means for leadership opportunities and where people might start to see themselves within the new model. So we will have elections coming up soon. So the governing board positions are ones that are open that we will be talking about a little, but then also today we'll be focusing on some of the ministry team side, which we haven't had a chance to really expand on more. So that will be informative for many people, hopefully, and see what kind of team they might fit into and kind of a little bit more about how that works. So we are using the Hotchkiss model. And you may have seen these charts before. We've been sharing them with the congregation. This is one of our more recent ones that you can see. We have the congregation at the top, and then there's the two sides. There's the governing board, and then there's the ministry side. And so they have that because it kind of creates clear roles for each side. So the governing board really does take care of governance and making sure that there's the finances of the church are in order, that there's appropriate policies for staff, and then there's the ministry side that works on trying to accomplish the goals of ministry and the goals that are kind of set by the governing board. And so as part of this, there's kind of our three pieces. There's the congregation, which obviously is the base of everything, because without the congregation, we would not have the church. And so they are members of the governing board. They are members of the team. They help to plan and set yearly goals and vision of ministry. It is from the feedback that the board would be getting from the congregation and really kind of trying to keep an ear out and an eye out for where they feel like the congregation is going, that they would start to put together those open questions and vision of ministry, which focus on kind of a few specific things that they feel like is a focus in the congregation. So, and of course, the congregation serves on the governing board, the congregation serves on the ministry teams. They are the team leaders on ministry teams, and so it's really the base of everything. And then you have the governing board, and they focus on the high-level decision-making for the church. So those long-term goals, long-term financial management, they delegate authority to the staff, but then they also hold the staff accountable. So they also select committees which help them gather information about things that may be important for the governing board. And then we have the staff, and they work to actually accomplish those goals that are set out by the governing board, and part of the vision of ministry, and help to guide the ministry teams. And so that staff role kind of means paid staff, but then it also means maybe volunteer staff. So those people who are volunteer coordinators and are brought on as team leaders, so they kind of fall into that side as well. And so here's another chart that we use to kind of help people understand a little bit the flow of it. So we can see the role of governance, they're articulating mission, choosing major goals and strategies, delegating power to staff, which leads daily work and then holds them accountable for their performance. And then we have the ministry side, which is kind of doing that daily work and performing actions to accomplish those goals. So you can see how the committees flow out of the governance side, and then the teams flow out of the ministry side. So in the governance, and this is an area that we've talked more about, so probably more familiar with, the governing board will govern primarily by discerning a mission, planning for the future, partnering with the senior minister and staff, and holding leaders of the church, including its old members, accountable for their performance. So one of the things that we really liked about this model is the amount of accountability that it brings for us. And so as part of joining the governing board, they have their own governing policy book, and there's kind of a covenant as part of that, which is the expectations for being a board member. You know, you're expected to show up, you're expected to participate, you're expected to be an active part of the conversation, you're expected to kind of do your due diligence in between board meetings, if there's things that you're supposed to be following through on and discerning and prayerfully thinking about, you're expected to kind of bring your best effort to the team meeting or to the governing board meetings. And so they hold themselves accountable for that, and we'll do kind of a board review and say at the end of the year, how have we done as a board? But then they also do help keep the staff accountable, and there is accountability at the end of the year through them as well, in conjunction with the senior minister, and just making sure that we are progressing along these goals. And are we, we set these goals out at the beginning of the year, and what have we done along the way to help achieve them? And then where do those goals need to take us in the next year? So the governing board roles and responsibilities, they help articulate the mission and choose major goals and strategies. They help hold people accountable for their performance, and then they delegate as necessary, maybe to committees or task forces as they need to gather information. So these are a look at some of the positions on the governing board. So we have the chair, and they prepare the board's agenda and facilitate the governing board meetings, work in partnership with the senior minister to just make sure that they're remaining a good partner with what is going on between staff and the governing board. And then we have the vice chair, and they of course will assist and substitute for the chair upon request, but then they're also kind of responsible for leading governing board planning work, and then that includes any of those conversations that we'd be having during the year with the church. And in our policy book, we have put in that we would like to see the board have at least 4 conversations throughout the year. So that would be a quarterly sort of conversation that would include the congregation, and that helps keep the congregation informed about what is happening and what the board is talking about, and provide input as they would like to. So we thought that those things are really important. And so that would be one of the things that the vice chair helps to coordinate. And then there is the clerk, someone that takes the minutes and attendance and just make sure that the policies are appropriately available to people and appropriately available to the congregation as they would like to review them. And then we have the treasurer. The treasurer in this board will be a little bit different than the roles of our current treasurer. They will chair the finance committee, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, but then they also help to provide that financial oversight. So they make sure that the reports are being available to board members. They also would direct an annual audit or review. Currently, we do an audit I don't know how often we do an audit, but it is recommended that we do an audit every 3 to 5 years. And so that would be more of an official audit that we would do by paying a company. But annually, they would also just be in charge of kind of reviewing everything, taking a look, making sure it's okay, everything looks okay. That would not be something that we would pay for, but they would just kind of take a look at that. And so since the treasurer is so involved in oversight, they don't actually have anything to do with the day-to-day financial management. So it's a little different than our current treasurer, who goes in and makes sure that they're signing checks correctly and counts the money and does all that. This treasurer would not have that same weekly obligation because they're the oversight piece and kind of that big picture, long range planning, financial information. And then we'd have 2 at-large members, and so they are members that are not one of the officers of the board, the chair, vice chair, clerk, or treasurer, but they would take leadership on specific projects perhaps, or also they would kind of be more focused on making sure that they're getting some feedback from the congregation. They would be what our current at-large member would be tasked with. And then we have the senior minister. So the senior minister does serve on the governing board and has voting rights, and is not subject to term limit. But we thought that that was important because it helps give them a voice. And in our church, the minister is required to be a member of the church. And so, but yet they're not allowed to vote. So they they're the only member that's not allowed that right, and that say so. So since it is so much of a partnership, it seemed like the appropriate thing to do. And there were other churches that we talked to that had that same policy, and that the minister kind of that was something that was very important to them, because they put a lot of work into everything, and it's very important to them. So it made sense to allow them to have a vote as well. So for our next, can you get it to move? Okay. So just a few things that makes for a good governing board member. These are kind of big picture people. This would be, some good traits would be being an effective communicator, kind of accountable and responsible. They like long-term, big picture thinking. Very self-motivated, confident about what they think, but then being open to listening to others' opinions and being willing to work with the group. So maybe and be able to achieve consensus.
And I would add to this. Sorry, I've had myself on mute because the landscaping's happening outside. But one of the things on the last slide, it said that under at-large members, that all members of the governing board are considered at-large members. And that's kind of, that implies several things, that everyone is representative, everyone is equal on that governing board, called to be in relationship with the congregation and act on behalf of them and the ministry of the church. And so it's very much a mentality of servant leadership. And I think that mentality makes for a good governing board member, like recognizing that everyone around that table has a voice. They elect their own officers from within based on personality types, but it's not so much a hierarchy, just how can we best use each other's gifts and skills in ministry. And then I'll also add, our last audit was about 3 years ago, so we try and do it the 3 to 5 years, if not sooner, which would be ideal.
Good, thank you. Okay, so what makes for a good governing board member? Be able to fulfill the goals and objectives of the congregation of the church. Governing board members should be willing to help establish open communication, so be very willing to talk with members of the church and be open about what the board is talking about. Encourage teamwork, because they are supposed to be very team-oriented. As Megan was saying, that it's not as much about the hierarchy as it is everybody's opinion and thoughts are brought to the table. Be able to be a problem solver and motivate and energize. You know, we want people that are kind of excited about the things that they've chosen, and so are able to go out and talk to people in the congregation about it and just kind of, you know, be some of that life and energy of the church and provide guidance and initiate action. So those are just a few of the things that we threw out there as being good characteristics. Certainly it does not have to be, you're not going to find one person that has all of those things. But with the governing board, you want to have a nice mix of skills and personalities and have it be a representation of the congregation as a whole. So another piece of the governing board would be committees. And the committees exist to help the governing board govern. They're not really for administration or program management. They don't really make decisions on the board's behalf. They really just are there to help provide information to the board. And so we have the governance committee. That is a committee that focuses on recruiting or training governing board members, so maybe new members that have joined, kind of go over the policy book with them, make sure they're understanding how things work on the board. And then they also help lead annual governing board retreat, where the board would pick or start to discuss their open questions and vision of ministry, and they help the board with their annual self-evaluation process. So this is really just a group of people to help support the board in their governing. And then we have nominating committee, which is very similar to nominating committee as we do now. They would be spending time thinking about the positions that maybe will be open in the board and the needs of the board, and trying to fit, sorry, my computer is acting like it's about to die, and trying to find people who would be a good fit. And then we have the finance committee. This is involved in our long-range financial oversight and the annual audit. So they are looking at future finances of the church, and then the past finances of the church. They don't really do any day-to-day management because they're the people who are there to help keep us accountable, and they have oversight. And then we have personnel. They help develop the personnel policies and make sure that we're in compliance with laws, and if there is a staff grievance, then they would help with that. So these committees would be appointed by the board. And Megan, you can jump in. I don't think that we had a term limit set. It's just as needed.
Yeah, committees are really as needed. Some, I think it was Asheville referred to them as seasonal committees. So nominating might be a seasonal committee. I think the finance committee would meet similar to how that financing investment committee meets now, quarterly or as needed, similar with personnel. So they meet as appropriate. They meet as the governing board has special projects. So there might be something like, and depending on the range of it and scope of it, the governing board might make it a committee or a task force. But yes, no term limits on those. And so the task force, they're the shorter term groups, tasked with very specific exploration of and getting information for the governing board. I think some you could argue, maybe they're committees or vice versa, but like a capital campaign, that's a very specific window. And so we put examples of ones that we know that our church is already working on or has talked about working on. So council for a while has been talking about exploring the need and viability of a capital campaign. So that would be a specific task force. There's a group exploring our relationship with Tuesday School and our kind of education rooms down on the first floor of the church, and how we could have a stronger partnership while serving the needs of our community. Similar stewardship and fundraising, I think it winds up being kind of a seasonal, more action-oriented thing, like for this year or for this kind of window of the year, we need to do the annual pledge campaign, as well as fundraising efforts if the budget isn't met, and kind of ways of creatively doing that. And we've had a group kind of working on fundraising, but it makes sense to combine both of those. Yeah, but task forces arise as needed. I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, Lindsay.
No, I don't think so. That's good.
So that brings us to the ministry side.
Yes. So the ministry side is really the daily work and the people out there trying to accomplish those long-term goals or short-term goals. So they really are doing the daily tasks, working with staff, performing actions to accomplish major goals and strategies, things like building community events. We're managing our church resources like buildings and grounds. We're doing the work out there that's really like transforming lives, and it is really like the work of the church. So we have different ministry teams, and the goal of a ministry team is really very specific. So each team, and you'll see more as we scroll down through them, has a pretty good, like a pretty sharp focus. And so the ministry teams exist to achieve practical results towards that goal. They make choices about how they will accomplish the ministry goals. And then with support from the staff, they kind of think creatively about new ways to fulfill the congregation's plans. So they form because they're set to work on a specific task. And So we hope that they have members, or they should be comprised of members who are just very interested in that task. Unlike a board where you want a lot of different opinions and you want a lot of different perspectives, on a team, you really just want to be exclusively comprised of people who are really passionate about whatever that goal or project is, and they want to accomplish it, and they're willing to work towards it. So it's a little bit different mindset. They would be funded just through our regular budget process, where we are hoping is what would happen is that we would be getting goals and a vision of ministry from the board and kind of those open questions. And then through that, would be able to go back to the teams and say, okay, so these are kind of our big goals. We know that some teams are automatically going to have their own sort of goal because it's just an important thing that we do at the church. And what do you need to be able to accomplish that? And so then be able to create a budget from there and have stewardship flow from that. So really there'll be maybe some teams that require no budget because the work that they do doesn't require that. There may be others, like the building and grounds team, that require a very large budget because obviously what they do is very money intensive because they're maintaining the building. So it'll just kind of vary, but it will be very similar to what we do now and how we go to the boards currently, any of the existing boards, and say, what kind of budget do you need, ideally, and they provide those numbers back. So the teams will function in very much the same way. And so the teams will have a leader, and the leader is somebody who knows how to do the work, or at least is willing to help explore how to do the work, and then is also willing to kind of accept responsibility for coordinating others and helping to achieve that goal. They would meet as necessary. They don't necessarily have to meet every week. They don't have to take minutes at the meetings. They just meet when they need to get their job done and work with the staff as necessary.
Yeah, and so I would add a little bit to some of that. I think in terms of the functioning, one of the requirements will be open and transparent communication. We want there to be very easy points of entry to all ministry teams. So if you come in the church, we can be like, here's the variety of ministries we have happening. Here are the contact persons from that. You can go to this section of our website or this part of our fellowship hall. They have all their information there. So people feel welcomed and can just jump right in where they have passion and want to be part of that work of transforming lives and living out the gospel. And so I think with that kind of transparency, that also flows into funding, right? So before you had 4 boards and committees, but now we have a variety of ministry teams. And so people have to be more specific with their budget requests and be really intentional about stewardship of treasure, not just carrying it over year to year. Well, yeah, this is about what we asked for. It's like, well, no, like, what do you want to do to live out our vision of ministry this year? What do you want to do to live out our mission, vision, and core values? Because as ministry teams form, they have to align with either the vision, the ministry, or core values of the church to get approved and have some sort of group consensus and leadership around them to get started as well.
So what makes it, a little bit about what makes a good team. A team, and I kind of already mentioned this, but should consist only of members who are committed to the task at hand and have something to contribute to completing it. So if you're really not that interested in what that team's goal is, there's no reason for you to be part of that team. There's no reason to feel like you have to be part of it. Nobody's going to call you and say, we really need you to be on this. And you have to say, oh, okay, I guess I can. You know, like we want ministry teams to be people gathered based on their shared passion for achieving that ministry goal. So we can look at a couple.
And I think folks should feel encouraged to just show up and participate. I know of I had a conversation as we were at the beginning of this process with the pastor with a similar model to this, where it is pretty passion driven. I was like, oh, well, how'd you have that decision get made? Like, what were the conversations like? And she was like, I don't know, if you're interested, you show up. If not, you don't. Um, just very much like, yeah, like be part of this work or don't. Make sure your voice is heard, because I mean, her approach is a little, we don't have time to waste. The gospel is too important. And I think ministry teams kind of get at that.
So just a few things about what makes a good team member. So someone that's passionate about the work that the team is doing, someone that's very like task oriented, willing to take responsibility for producing those results, action driven. So these are those like task oriented people. If you like to do hands-on work and you like to see like immediate results, well, maybe not immediate results, but you like to feel like you're actively working towards a goal versus just sitting around at meetings like talking about doing things, then this would maybe be a good place for you, as being part of a team or being a team leader. And so as part of that, you still have to have a willingness to collaborate with your team and listen, because this is not just like one person leading everything and trying to railroad through. So you want them to be working together and share and collaborate and be willing to share ideas and listen to each other and kind of think creatively about how to achieve those goals. And so, Megan, did you have anything else to add to that part of what makes a good team member? Otherwise, we can start, I think we start going into like what the teams are.
I think that's all of that is good, and especially being a good communicator. And well, actually what I would add is we keep driving home like, yes, like be task oriented, action driven, but I think you need a balance of Marthas and Marys on these teams too. So folks that can be like, remind us, well, why are we doing this? How is it feeding the vision and ministry of the church? Let's prayerfully consider what we're doing first. But that's not done out of a place of fear. It's done out of a place of focusing and reminding like why we're gathered in the first place. And I think that spurs us on to the more action and the folks that are like, all right, let's get this done. So the ministry teams.
All right. So these we've started putting together based on current things that we do here at the church, and where we could kind of see people splitting up that would have areas where there's very common characteristics, based on our current ministry goals. So these are kind of the teams that we would expect to form during the trial run year. It may be that as we go that there would be some changes and that extra teams would pop up, or maybe we decide, oh, well, we could have combined it after all. So this is just kind of to give people an idea. And one would be worship in the arts. And so the focus of that would be visioning and implementation of worship and arts programming. We've tried to align each one of these with a core value. So one of our core values is, of course, worship. We are a church. And so that would be the core value attached to that. But some of the things that this group would be doing as far as tasks would be participate in worship planning teams, logistics and recruitment for the worship support, like ushers, communion servers. They would provide some creative input for music and other program that we have. So that would be people who are interested in worship and how that experience is in our church. Megan, did you have anything to add to worship in the arts?
No, I mean, I think that's a pretty straightforward one. And I think, so for some of these ministry teams, the team lead will come from the congregation and be kind of one of those non-paid staff, as Lindsay mentioned, your Uber volunteer. But for some, it will necessarily, because of the function of the tasks, be a staff person or myself to coordinate it. But yeah, I'm that's a team I'm excited about, because I've done worship planning teams before in congregations, and having the collaborative voice as we seek to do creative things in different seasons or different styles of worship. I think that'll be great, and we can explore that offering together. similarly, caring ministries, that aligns with a couple core values, I think. I forget what we put in all of those, but that becomes kind of our pastoral care stuff. And if you've ever seen that card that says caring ministries at the church, it lists all those things like transportation and prayer group, the flower ministry, doing meal trains, member to member visiting, the senior parish mailing that we do. So all the ways that we can better spiritually support each other. And I think the recent addition of the neighborhood groups and neighborhood teams somewhat fall under caring ministries as well as membership too, but they're ways that we can better support each other.
Yeah, and that's one of the ones that even under our current structure with deacons that has kind of emerged as its own sort of subset of deacons and its own team. So people have kind of already taken on some of that. And then we have the welcome, and this is a team to help us focus on extending a welcome out in the community and at the church. So this is helping visitors that we have come to the church feel more welcome, and then also helping us figure out ways to extend that welcome out in the community, to reach out into the community a little bit more. So some of the tasks might be the greeters that we have organizing those greeters, working on the welcome packets that we create to give to people, doing visitor follow-up, and then any kind of evangelism materials, those things that we send out into the community.
And that could include anything from, like, we need to rethink our advertising strategy in the local papers to updating the banners outside of the church, making sure there's good signage, which to make it accessible and inviting when visitors come.
So our next team would be hospitality, and they would be people provide opportunities for fellowship, care, and connection to the church and the community. That aligns with our hospitality and welcome core value. And then it would include things like community hour, the funeral receptions that we provide, church meals that we may have, some of the stuff that like our current parish life committee does now, but any kind of hospitality there at the church, here at the church. So another team would be membership, and this is helping to attract folks from interest in church membership to engagement into the church, and then creating fun opportunities. This is kind of in line with our intergenerational core value and also stewardship. And some tasks might be keeping up the membership rolls, updating the picture wall, and supporting like the new member classes that we would have. Another team would be adult faith formation, and its focus would be providing ideas, support, logistical support, and marketing for any of our adult faith formation series. This is things like our Joy and Justice book club, Media That Matters, beloved community events, sacred conversations, Bible study, etc. Then we separated out children's faith formation and youth faith formation because we felt that those are very specific. You can get a little bit different group of people who are interested in the youth side versus the children's side. And so we thought for the teams that it makes more sense to have them separate. And so the children's faith formation is one that helps to provide ideas and support, classroom support, and marketing for any children faith formation program. Things like children's worship, vacation Bible school, Super Saturday event or Super Sunday events, all of that. And these are all under our faith formation core value. And then we have youth faith formation, which would provide support and marketing and in-person support for our youth faith formation programming. Things like youth group, youth mission trips, our kids book club kind of falls under that, and then anywhere that we wanted to grow that in the future. We've kind of started that team a little bit. And so it's important to keep in mind that any of these teams, because they can sound like a lot when you're listing them up like that, they don't have to be a lot of people. I think that one of the churches that we talked to said that as long as they have a group of 3 people who are actively interested in that team, that was kind of one of their characteristics, that one of the goals that they look for a team. So it does not have to be a large group of people. It's just important that they are interested in like working together with that. And so the youth faith formation, child faith formation, those would be examples of teams that myself as the minister of faith formation would lead and provide staff support for, much like I already do in our current system. So this allows us to be a little bit more focused in the interests. Our current faith formation board, you have people that are interested in adult versus child versus youth. So it's a little bit of a mix, but this allows a little bit more focus for that. And so hopefully helps to achieve some of those goals. And then we have creation care. And this would revolve around education around creation care, climate justice, and actionable steps that our church can take to better care for creation. And some of these things include our hiking ministry. Right now, they're actually looking into a solar project. They've talked about composting, education events, things like that. And this is actually, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I think creation care is a good example of how teams can shift over time. So right now, as Lindsay mentioned, that the creation care ministry is very focused on the solar project. And so there are folks that have not been part of that ministry area joining on because they have specific skill sets related to that or interests related to that. And then they might kind of flow off of it for a time as creation care figures out their next focus or ministry area. But teams, yeah, it's pretty fluid. You can come and go.
So our next one, let's see, there's the finance. So this would be different from the finance committee, which is primarily having to do with oversight. The finance team would help the staff with financial management. So part of this would be a team of people who would be actually taking in the money at the end of the Sunday service and counting it and recording it. They would be learning about some of the day-to-day finances to help support with budget creation and receive weekly financial reports, help create financially responsible procedures for the staff. So that would just be support that helps the staff be accountable to itself. And then we've got the building and grounds. They would be focusing on care and stewardship of the church campus, so the church buildings and the grounds, and may include doing things like annual walkthroughs, researching and evaluating major building projects, maintaining the memorial garden, organizing quarterly work days that church members could come and help, kind of making sure that we are aware of different problems that may be happening in the building. And so that is one of our core values is stewardship, taking care of our resources, and our church building and grounds is certainly one of those. Then we've got the justice team, and this one aligns with our justice core value, and also, so that's its primary focus, is kind of implementation of that. And it might be things like making recommendations on the allocation of outreach funding, mission trips, offering monthly opportunities for outreach activities, coordinating advocacy and justice efforts. That is one of the areas where our current outreach board, people that are on that would maybe be interested in joining the justice team. And it's one that is a little bit of all these teams, I feel like it has the least like specific tasks allotted to it. So it'll be interesting to see where that team goes, because there's a lot of possibilities there. Maggie, did you have anything to add to
Yeah,
Kristen's comment?
I think yes, it is shifting what was the outreach board to very much align with that core value that the congregation came up with around justice. And so I think it'll be I am curious too, but my hope is in living out that value is more hands-on projects, and offering those like Church Beyond the Wall Sunday, and um, continuing to do like community garden or the wood splitting, but maybe with a more focused effort. Um, and yeah, and I don't know. I think we're still trying to work out who allocates the outreach funds and how that works, between the governing board and what would be the justice team. Um, but yes, the overall outreach and justice initiatives, and they might pick like a focus for the year that they really want to do that. Like right now, a lot of our stuff has to do with racial justice this season. So at times it's been creation justice.
We decided to go ahead and split off the Feed a Kid and create that as its own team, because that is a big program, coordinating that annual summer Feed a Kid ministry. So it seemed like a big enough thing that requires enough hours and labor, that it was worth naming it as its own team, that team of people that helps coordinate that. So that includes fundraising, implementation, recruitment in our local church, liaising with or mobile outreach as related to Feed a Kid. So all that work that goes into that Feed a Kid ministry, which is so important to the church.
And that's a good example of a team that is sort of seasonal, right? They don't need to meet year round, but leading up to Feed a Kid, then that team activates and gets focused and takes us through the summer. And then the last one is ministry teams can form wherever. So we came up with these based on our current ministry needs. Some of them may go away at some point because that's not a ministry desire or need of the congregation and no longer effective in how we focus our time, our talent, our treasure in living out the gospel. But ministry can bubble up as folks have ideas. And as we said kind of at the beginning of this, if you have an idea for a ministry team, bring it forward. And then, as long as it aligns with the core values and the mission and vision of the church, as long as there's folks passionate around it, then we can figure out how to support it and make it happen.
Did anybody have any, sorry, my son was playing with some sort of toy in the background. Does anybody have any questions about anything? I know we covered a lot of material. So this is just kind of the start. There will be other opportunities. This is our first dive into going over some of that team, some of the characteristics of the teams and what we think the teams would look like and what they would be responsible for. And so we expect to be going over this more and providing more opportunities for people to ask questions and maybe think about it some more. And then we expect it to be something that kind of evolves over the course of the trial year. So we ask for grace and patience as we move forward with this process. But we're excited about it and think that it will be a really wonderful thing for our congregation, and are very interested in where it's going to take us and excited about where it's going to take us. So anybody have any questions about anything?
I don't have a question. Am I audible?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, I don't have a question. I would just say this is very helpful to have gone over the whole thing and just see how it fits together in our very specific situation. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. If something comes up that a team wants to start out in the middle of the year, depending on if there's a disaster someplace, locally perhaps, is there a fund available? Is there some line item in the budget that can then be accessed?
I think that, oh, well, go ahead, Megan.
Well, so there was something in the packet that we sent out that has to be, so the budget isn't determined yet. The current council has to figure out how the proposed ministry teams fit into the current allocated budget. But one of the recommendations is that when we go through a true budget cycle for this kind of trial run and figure that out, that there be a budgeted fund put in place for that specific purpose. If there is a ministry team that arises mid-year, but discretionary funds can be used to help out with a ministry team too. Sometimes a ministry team that pops up mid-year may be encouraged to self-fundraise, as that works with the church's financial calendar as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would it's very much like it would be now. You know, we don't have anything. If all of a sudden something happens, there currently isn't a way for a board to come up with an amazing amount of more money. So, you know, it's kind of like one of those things. Most teams are not going to start out requiring a bunch of money, I would imagine. That it would be one of those things that you kind of gather around a passion or a need, and then you start to realize where you might need funding. But I don't think it'll be that different than what we currently would see as far as big things. The one area where there's some gray is in the building and the building and grounds team, because that is a place where you can have great unexpected expenses all of a sudden popping up. And so that would be a potential where you would have to go to the board, and the board would have to make decisions about, like, how could we fund this given our current budget.
So like if say the justice team decides to build ramps and they raise some money for ramps, would that would go into like a line item, like, or like how do we have a tracking mechanism yet in terms of like how that money would be allocated?
So again, I'd say it's similar to right now. So like we budget a certain amount of money for outreach and justice ministries every year based on kind of what might be anticipated with projects. So my hope would be if the justice team is committed to doing ramp building, right, or working with Habitat and Thermal Belt to do that, then, you know, they figure out the average cost of a ramp and say, well, in a year we do about like 1 to 3 of these, so we'll budget for that, and kind of make that estimate. But also don't just sit on that money, right? So if they're not doing the ramps, then it could be reallocated towards a local ministry project that's doing good for the community, or, you know, buying trash bags for cleanup efforts, whatever it might be.
My other question was about meetings and like how that might happen. Like that's a lot of teams. Are they all meeting on a regular basis, or do they just meet as needed? And like, or is it like email meetings okay? Like,
yeah, like we don't need your minutes. We don't need what we do need to know is when you're meeting, so that way it can be accessible to all. But you do meet over email. You meet as necessary. You don't meet just because you need to have a meeting to be a ministry team. If that's all that binds you together, then we need to dissolve that ministry team. So it really is kind of project ministry driven with that. One of the churches we talked to did something called Calendar Palooza every year. And so ministry teams would come having anticipated, and the trial run's going to be different, but, you know, after you kind of get your feet grounded, and assuming this is successful and we go into year 2, then the ministry team should be anticipating for the next year and planning, like, okay, knowing this vision of ministry, we want to do these things this year. And so everyone comes with their their events, their meetings, and we coordinated and put it up there. I mean, so right now, like the one restriction is just Zoom, which it probably will be for the next year, but meetings don't need to be long. You just kind of report the action items and what your focus is so folks can be involved in it. But I think it'll be okay. And I think meeting around specific stuff is energizing rather than sitting through something just to sit through something.
So I very much like how the
minutes.
Lindsay, did you want to?
You don't need any minutes, but you want to have some kind of report that you can then give to the congregation what's going on in those teams.
Which that's
and
what
the
we
staff
mean.
will handle that.
Yeah, so that's what we mean. Like if you meet and there isn't staff there, or even if there is, what we want is not minutes, but a write-up of like, what are you working on right now? How can people get involved? And it comes back to that transparency, but the easy points of entry. So always think about the folks who aren't at the table and how they can be involved. Lindsay, you were going to add something.
Yeah, so an example would be kind of like what the Creation Care team is doing right now. You know, they're very focused on a project, reaching out together. Andrea provided a little write-up that I put in the email blast, calling for other people who may be interested in the work that they're currently doing. So, you know, there's not really a minutes record per se, but they're making us aware as staff of what is going on, and then also, you know, inviting the congregation to let them know and help them participate as well. So I think that there will be that, I could see it more saying, okay, this is like sort of a monthly check-in. This is what this team has been working on. These are the action steps that we're taking. And then that would be it, because that allows us to know and lets the congregation know, because maybe somebody would read that and say, oh yeah, like I'm super interested in that, or I have a skill set in that particular area that would be useful for this team. And so, you know, I'll contact them or, you know, show up to their next meeting. So I think we'll just have to rethink the way that we make all that information available to people. And through emails and through newsletters and signage in the church. We really want to do a lot more for the signage in the church when we're allowed to be there again, and providing more of that information in the fellowship hall so that it's there, so that people can easily see what's going on, so that each team maybe would have their own sort of little space that they would be making sure that it's updated with, you know, maybe current projects they're working on, and, you know, a question, do you have this sort of skill or whatever, a call out to the congregation to try to get, if they're in need of something. So.
And in the absence of that, we're going to want to do it on our website for as long as we can't meet in person. But I think that's good in general, even if we can meet in person. I mean, the stories that you hear out right now is most people, when they're coming to a church for the first time, they've already listened to several of the sermons online. They've vetted your website. They've gone through, they've looked at the ministry opportunities. So we want that to be active and engaging.
Anybody else have a comment or question? Thank you all for coming today and listening to us talk, and participating in everything. Megan, did you have anything else to add before we end our recording, or?
I don't think so. I just, I would echo Lindsay, just thank you for being here, and thank you for your willingness to be open to this and experiment with us. I mean, none of us know how this is going to go, but I think it's exciting that we get to be driven by our passions, because we are. I've heard the joke that our church can't find anyone to serve on boards because everyone's serving on boards in the community and they're doing outreach and volunteering in the community. And I think we often do that because out Out there, it's a very specific thing. And it's like, oh, well, I'm into classical music, or I like the stuff that Thermal Belt's doing. And so now we get to do that in the church, and I'm excited about that. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.